Hello and welcome to another video tutorial from Blender HD. My name is Jonathan Lampel, and today we are going to go through the second part of how to make a scene realistic inside of Blender. The first part we went over lighting, and as you can see here we changed our flat scene to a scene that really, looks better even without any sort of materials. Just to highlight a few key points that we went over. If you missed it, I recommend going back and watching it. But if you know a little bit about lighting, I will just kind of skim over here because it is really, really important. What we did is we had a main light coming from the right, casting these nice shadows over it, which really add to the atmosphere of the shot. And we put it at such an angle to make these barrels very round um, to really complement them on their shape. And then we also had our environment lighting coming from everywhere, making it look like, the atmosphere, is the light is bouncing around and coming back into these shadows so they're not completely black. And we also added some lights in here for the toxic spill. And lastly, we added a rim light, which you can see just barely affects the barrels over here. It was a spotlight, but it really helps the barrels stand out from the background. So that's what we covered last time. And in this tutorial, we're going to be covering details. Now, first off, I should talk about what details are. I'm sure you know what they are, but the problem is when you're going through a scene and you're looking at details, um, the problem is how far do you go with details? Because in nature and, in real life, things are infinitely complicated. Now, if you think about it, there is no possible way that we could simulate every molecule and atom working together to make this object. That would be silly and it just wouldn't work very well. So there has to be a point at which we say, okay, enough is enough, it looks fine. Um, and so we obviously have to have some detail, but we can't realistically simulate actual objects. So we have to add in the details ourselves. Um, so the point is, I guess, is not necessarily to make something as, physically accurate as possible, but to make it look as natural or realistic as possible. And what I mean by that is just adding things that you would naturally expect would be in this environment. So if you take a look, you'd see that this is sort of a post-apocalyptic scene. The artist has already added some vines overhanging here. Remember, we downloaded this from BlendSwap. And so there's obviously some vegetation growing. There's some old posters here. There's a wall, and I'm assuming this is some sort of water spill. Um, and so we can get a pretty good, we can have a pretty good guess at what is going to be in this environment, and kind of try to base base our details on that. So the last question that we need to ask ourselves is what details are we going to have be actual geometry, and what details are we going to use texturing in the form of butt mapping and normal mapping. Because for things like this barrel, where it's very smooth and we're just going to have a little bit of scratches, it'll work perfectly fine and much, much faster if we just do it using bump mapping or normal mapping in the materials. But for things such as, the ground, say for instance, which I don't think I'm going to do, but pretend we wanted this to be a gravel floor or gravel ground. If I was, say, zoomed back way over here and I was looking at it from this angle, if I textured that using a bump map and normal mapping and just use an image texture, it would look perfectly fine. But if I was zoomed in, say, really, really close like this, normal mapping and bump mapping wouldn't work all that well. It would look bad. It would just look flat, and it just wouldn't work all that well. So when it's our focus or when we're very close to it and we need it to stand out, that's when we need to make it actual geometry. So when we need it to stand out, that's when we need to make it specifically an object. And generally we do that using particles and such. So that being said, we can go ahead and start detailing this scene. And what I'm going to do first is fix something that bothers me all the time in a lot of 3D renders, and it just is a dead giveaway that the scene is fake is that right here there is a or like a sharp edge between the floor and the wall. And if you think about it, this never happens. Um, very, very, very rarely is it going to happen, especially not in a street. There's going to be a curve, a baseboard, something. Even inside your house, you have little baseboards running along the floor. I mean, sometimes, a lot of times walls come together at an angle or the ceiling is put on at an angle without anything. But when it comes to the floor and the wall, there is always something there. And even if, you're looking at a reference image and there isn't something there, I recommend putting it in because it just makes it feel more natural. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. I'm going to Shift S, cursor to center, add a cube, go into side view, pull it over, go into edit mode, scale it down, and it's kind of hard to see where exactly the wall is, so move it about there, about there. Not too thick, so probably something like that will be fine. Scale along the Z, actually, I think that's a bit too tall. And then finally scale along the X. And you can see what I'm doing here in the bottom left if you ever get lost. That has the keys that I'm pressing will show up right there. Okay, so that is a subtle difference, but in the long run, it does make it look a little bit better. And it just adds to the realism. Second thing we need to think about is the relative size of objects. And I probably should have done this first, but this is something that is another dead giveaway that is seen as, not real, it's CG, or it doesn't look very good, it doesn't look professional. And if you have objects that are not proportionally, the right size to each other, it's going to look very off. And in this scene, we definitely have some of that going. And it's most noticeable when we have the barrels here, and we have these posters, which are kind of big, and then we have these, leaves, which are really, really small. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these posters, scale them down. Apparently there were two. Okay, that's weird. I'm going to scale that down, take this one, scale that down as well. And I think there were also some posters on the wall. Yep, right there. Scale that one down, and scale that one down. That one can be a little bit bigger. And that not only helps make the barrels themselves look bigger, it'll also help just make the scene more realistic as we correct the size of these objects. So I'm going to take this as well, select both of those, scale it up a little bit. I don't know why the origins are all the way over there, that's kind of annoying. And for the sake of not symmetry, composition, I'm going to move it a little bit over to the left, grab on the X, and just kind of move it over there. That'll just help round out our scene. So those larger leaves will help us in the long run, but looking at it now, since we scaled this up, we can easily see that each of those are squares and not actual leaves. And so making a decision right now, I'm going to go ahead and delete those, and we'll add those later using particles. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Delete those leaves. See, those leaves are also square, I think. Yep, and they're very, very small. That could be some good moss. It's small enough to look like moss, so I think I'll leave that. And these are not even in our scene, so it's just going to take up rendering time. So I can just go ahead and delete those. And now we have everything proportional to each other. So I think we're all set there. And I will go over the bump mapping and stuff when we do our materials, so right now I'm just going to go over the actual geometry, which there isn't a whole lot of, but just adding a little bit is going to add a lot to our scene. One last thing is, I think, yeah, earlier I closed this up, this end, because I didn't like having both ends of this open. It seemed kind of weird to have a container that's open on both ends. I, that wouldn't really serve a purpose. I mean, 'cause all your stuff would just fall out. So I closed up one of the ends, but that's just personal preference. You can do whatever you want. I mean, you can do whatever you want all the time, but anyway, so what I have done is in the second layer here, I've just modeled some really simple kind of debris. So I have two stones here. You see they're very simple geometry. I just took icospheres, used proportional editing down here, and just kind of pushed and pulled some the vertices until they looked kind of like rocks, and I made them a little bit more flat on the bottom and made sure that their origins were right there and that there was something for it to rest on. Then I made a little tiny branch, kind of like a stick. I think I'm going to scale that a little bit on the x-axis. But yep, that's pretty much all it is. It's just a little stick. We don't have too many of them, but it'll be there, and it'll be small enough to where you can't see. I mean, if it's that small, you can't really see that it's not even round, so it'll be fine. This is a pine needle, so we can scatter those around, and this is a kind of a tuft of grass that we can use particles to make a few things of grass. And we could make a few more of these if we wanted to. If you're going to make this a scene for like a contest, or maybe you wanted to get in the gallery or something, I would highly recommend the more variation you have, the better. But for the sake of time, I'm only going to have these 5 objects. So for these two, since they're going to be using the same particle system, which, by the way, we're going to be using particle systems to scatter these across the ground, I'm going to take this rock, go to, wrong panel, wrong panel again, wow, okay, I was in the right one the first time, okay, add it to a group, and I'm going to call this rocks. Then this one, I'm going to add it to the group rocks, and that'll come in handy when we're doing our particles. Alright, so I'm going to hide those because they're kind of annoying. Now we can go ahead and start adding in our little details that we have. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using particles to generate the the little things of debris across the ground. And the way we're going to do this is we want to do it in a controlled manner. We don't just want them randomly appearing, or else you're going to get tufts of grass coming from inside the barrel, and you're going to get just weird stuff. It's not going to look very organized or good. So a good thing to do is we can go into edit mode with this plane selected, and just hit, well, I'll make a loop cut there to make it roughly square. It doesn't have to be exact. Then select everything, W, and subdivide. Then I'm going to increase the cuts to something like 20, and this does increase the vertex count obviously, but it's going to help us a lot in the long run, and you'll see that in just a second. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add the let's go with the stones first. So what I can do is I'm going to add a particle system, name this stones, and down here under, first of all, we don't want these to be particles, we want it to be hair, because we want it to be consistent throughout the whole time, otherwise it's going to be kind of weird. And it looks like I didn't even have like any object selected, so that's awkward. Okay, thankfully we can just go ahead and click that, and all of our settings are automatically there. So yeah, we choose hair because we want it to be consistent throughout the whole timeline. We don't want them falling off like particles or being affected by gravity or any of that. And under the render settings, we're going to choose group, and group we're going to choose rocks. So now we have them, they're sitting on the ground. But you see there's kind of an issue. Even though we placed um, the bottom of the rocks um, right at the origin, they're still tilted. So what we can do is we can go into the second layer, go into edit mode, and if we select everything, it's kind of hard to tell which way to tilt it, but we can just guess. Rotate 90 degrees. There we go. That fixed it. I'll go ahead and choose the other one. Go into edit mode. Rotate it 90 degrees. And make sure that the bottom of it is still sitting at the origin. There we go. So now they're sitting flat on the ground like good rocks should. Okay, so that's way too many rocks. So let's go ahead and decrease the count to, let's go with 500. Yeah, let's stick with 500. And whenever you're working with particles, you want to be sure to save often, because it really sucks when you go ahead and make a lot of changes and your computer can't handle it, or something random happens. Usually bad things happen when you're dealing with physics and stuff. Not all the time, but the chances increase of crashing when you're working with large numbers of objects. So I recommend saving whenever you can. So there we go. We can see that the size of the rocks are way too big, so we can go ahead and decrease that here under the size. So we can go ahead and make this maybe 0.02. And remember, we'll want to keep this in proportion. So 0.015. So I want to keep these really small. They just want to be, minor details. Is that too small? Yeah, it's a bit too small. Okay, I'm going to go with 0.02, and then we can take this random size and increase that to, say, 0.5, and then we're going to get rocks that are as small as that and as large as that one right there. And what the random size does is it just kind of varies the size, but it only makes them smaller, doesn't make them bigger. So keep that in mind. And maybe a little bit smaller, 0.015. And that looks good. So that looks like a good size for the rocks. And now we need to decide where we want the rocks. And the way we're going to do this is with this object selected, we're going to go into weight paint. And under the this little button here, what is that? That's object data. Yep, object data. We're going to add a new vertex color. Nope, not vertex color, my bad. Vertex group, and we're going to name this rocks. And so now I'm going to use the add brush with a strength of 1, and F rescales the brush if you want, and Shift F does the strength, just in case you want to know. And I can go ahead and paint in where I want these rocks. And it doesn't affect anything yet, but when I go into the particle menu and under vertex groups, enable density, you can see that I am basically now just painting on the rocks right into the scene, and it's very, very cool. So I'm going to place them in places that I think that rocks should be. So just kind of spots here and there. That's not even inside the thing, so I'll subtract that later. But generally, debris accumulates kind of around objects. Definitely along the walls, you're going to want it kind of around there. And then I can decrease the strength so it won't be as many rocks here, but there'll still be a few hanging out. Some in there, some in there. Definitely want some there. And then I can go ahead and take the subtract brush and remove the rocks that we aren't even going to see. So there's no point in having geometry where it's not needed. It just takes up power and time, and we don't want that. So that looks like a pretty good distribution. You could get pretty picky if you wanted to, but I think that's good. And I'm going to go ahead and decrease the amount, say 250 maybe. Maybe just 100. I think that looks good. And now I can go ahead and tweak the size because I don't like how big some of those are. So I'm going to go 0.01 on those. And there we go. So it's not, you know, a dominating effect. We just have a few rocks here and there. Just a little bit of rubble that's been, you know, kicked around and, you know, coming out from the crumbled concrete or whatever. But it really helps pop, make the scene pop. Like it has, I don't know, it just makes it feel more natural. So that's very, very cool. I forgot to rename that rocks. Okay, so there we have our first particle system, and you can probably guess exactly what's going to be going on next, because now we're going to add the twig. So I'm just going to rename this twig. Make sure I have that selected. Add a new particle system. Name this twig. Twigs, whichever. Take that down a bit, and under options, choose object and twig. And I forgot to change this to hair. Alright, so now I have our twigs. And again, they are rotated kind of funny. So all we have to do is go ahead and take this, rotate it 90 degrees, and bring it to its origin right there. And there we have our twigs. Obviously, that actually looks kind of cool. Like could be like a homemade grass mat or something, but that's not what we're going for. So we're gonna go ahead and make this look like twigs. We definitely don't need that many, so not even 100. I'm gonna go with 25. And I'm gonna take down the size, so 0.02. And even the random size. So there's not that many, but it'll help it look a little bit better. And we don't have any options for rotation right now, but if I check advanced, it gives us the normal particle options, but we can now use them for our hair. So now under, where is it? Rotation, there we go. We can check that. And if we, you know, spin the phase around, we can see that it's changing, but they're all facing the same direction. We don't want that. So if we just take the random, they're now going to be strewn in random directions, which is exactly what we're looking for. Lastly, I'm going to go into weight paint, add another weight paint map, and name this twigs. Take the add brush at full strength, or whatever strength you want, just kind of paint in a few areas where we want our twigs. Make sure they're enabled in the vertex group. Alright, now we have our twigs. Pine needles, we could... Should we do that? Yeah, may as well. I don't see why not. Twigs, looking at it now, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make them slightly bigger. Under physics, 0.03. And I'm going to make less of them. Okay, so you see there's not that many, but just having a few there adds a little bit of variety and helps it to look better. Okay, so this is going to be our pine needles. Pine needle. And just like the twigs, what we're going to do is take this, add a new hair particle system, pine needle, and under render, choose our pine needle. There we go. And since these are pretty much the same on all sides, or is it? Eh. It looks fine the way it is right now. So now we can go ahead and paint those in. I'm going to be lazy, name this needle. There we go. And I'm going to add this in a few more places than the other ones because, I don't know, they just kind of tend to come together in clumps. Wow, that's not even an area. But yeah, they accumulate kind of on the edges of stuff, so I'm not going to have too many out here, but just on the sides a little bit. I can subtract all that. And there we go. We have our pine needles. And that's also kind of a cool effect, but that's not what we want, so we're going to go ahead and check advanced to get all our other options. Check rotation, turn the phase to whatever, and then make sure that you check random. So now we have our nice pine needly mess. And I think the size is a bit too big for pine needles. We have to keep our scale in mind the entire time. And maybe these are kind of big pine needles, but 0.025 should work great. We don't really need to have any random size. It looks fine the way it is. But we can choose random emission. That kind of helps just, if it's jittered, you know, it tends to look kind of uniform after a while if you have tons of them. But if you choose random, that helps. Even distribution doesn't matter because we weight painted it. Make sure it's on random. And yeah, I think that looks great. I might want to add a few more. It all depends on what your computer could handle, but I wouldn't sacrifice if it's an essential detail. I wouldn't sacrifice it just because, you know, it takes longer for your computer. But you know, if it's not really that important, then don't worry about it. So just whatever your priority for your detail is, but generally, you know, you want to make it look realistic. So I think that looks good. We have our pine needles, and this is really starting to look a lot better because these little natural elements are going to really help with the ivy that's growing, because it just helps it look more in place. Before there was, you know, no dirt, it was all concrete, and then randomly some ivy. So this will just help make it look a little bit better. And lastly, we can go ahead and add our grass clumps. So that's already named grass. And ahead of time, I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees because I know that it's going to need to. Okay, one more. This does get a little bit tedious, but as you can see, it helps out the scene immensely. So don't be afraid to do a little bit of tedious work because it looks much, much better. So hair, advanced, 200-ish. Let's go with object and grass. So there we go, now I have our grass. For this we're going to do something a little bit different, and actually I'm going to go ahead and make this about 50, and you'll see why in a second. But now we're going to go ahead and, like the other ones, we're going to weight paint it. Weight paint. Vertex groups and grass. Add. Where should we add the grass? Let's see. Might want to have some in maybe in the cracks over there. Maybe sprouting up in the barrel there, just kind of breaking up the solid line there. That'll help. And this is kind of a technique, or you know, something that I learned to do in basically any type of art, is if you kind of layer things like this, it makes it look a lot better. So if you have grass up here and you have grass back there, both behind and in front of the object, it helps break it up and just gives the scene more depth, because you can see that, you know, it's in front of something, it's behind something, and it just does something visually that makes it just stand out a whole lot more. So there you go. I should make a video on composition sometime. I feel like that would be a good idea. Alright. Moving on, I'm going to add some right there. Okay, so I turned down the amount of grass to 50, which is, relatively a low number. And that's because in this particle system we're going to be using children, because you can see that these tiny pieces of grass all look the same and aren't very realistic at all. So you probably noticed that and wondered why they look kind of funny. Because, I mean, all they are is three planes modeled together with a solidify modifier, in case you want to make your own. But when we go ahead and we add children, then it's going to add more. But what we can use is clumping. And when we clump our objects like this, they're going to come together kind of like a sprout. And this is going to be the basis of our grass. So we can add some randomness in the rotation. So that's going to help a little bit. We can add some randomness with our physics, with our random size. Actually, no, we won't do that there. And you can see it wasn't really working anyway, and that's some weird thing to do with the advanced option. I haven't quite figured out when it works and when it doesn't. But that's okay, we can always do that later. Let's see, what was I going to do? Oh yeah, children. Okay, so we need to add some randomness to this because they all look kind of the same, and they're all the same size, and we can't have that. So I'm going to shrink the size down and up the threshold, so there's a little bit more randomness, not a lot, but that's okay. We can change the shape, which, since we don't have that many vertices in these blades of grass, it's not going to help a whole lot, but it will help a little bit. Parting, you can see, doesn't really do anything in this case. But uniform roughness, you're definitely going to see a difference. And when you scale that all the way down, you're going to get a lot more noisy results. Because, even though they don't have that many vertices, the size still matters. And so, then we can kind of play with this. Now I'm just going to add one. I think that looks better. We can add a little bit of random roughness as well. And you can change the shape to be what you like. And that looks good. I think that looks a whole lot better. We now have little tufts of grass, and remember, we're keeping our scale in mind because that's hugely important. So I'm going to go ahead and make these a little bit smaller. I think we can do that under the velocity settings. Yep. So if I say 0.75, even 0.5. Okay, even something at 0.25. You can see how shrinking the grass makes the scene look much, much different. So if I had this at 1, it makes the barrels look very, very small. It just kind of messes up the scene in your mind. I mean, maybe there is tall grass like that, but really, you want to make sure that it's in proportion, and just play around with it and whatever looks better. So I think, what do we have? 0.5? Yeah, I think 0.5 looks good. Okay, so now we have all of our ground detail. And, the difference between having no detail on the ground and having that is very, very big. You can see the modifiers. If I turn all these off, that, looks very, very bland. But when we go ahead and add just these simple things, it didn't even take that long. If I wasn't explaining it as I went, that would have not taken very long at all. And already our scene looks much, much better. A lot of the other details that we're going to add, like the some decals on the barrel and stuff, we're going to be doing with texturing. Also the wall, concrete on the wall, we can do that with texturing. But these posters are something that we need to have some detail. And this one looks like it's floating on the ground a little bit. But you can see that I think what they did is applied a displace modifier for a texture, because you can see it looks really, really uniform. But we can go ahead and just kind of make it a little bit more flat, because I'm not quite liking how bumpy that is. So I'm just going to scale that down on the Z axis. And just to make it a little bit more, I don't know, piece of paper like, I'm going to enable proportional editing and take the corners and just kind of rotate them up. So even though rotating a vertex doesn't seem to do a whole lot, if you rotate it in proportional editing, it's going to affect the vertices surrounding it and kind of curl the edges up like a piece of paper that's been on the ground for a while. So that's looking fine. And we can put that on the ground now. Try not to have it intersect the stones if you can. If it is, it's not a huge deal, but I mean, I doubt anybody's going to see it, but if you can avoid it, try to avoid it. Scale that down a little bit, and there we go. That looks fine. Now for this one, that one also has those places where it's intersecting. I think he was trying to get like a tearing effect, but it looks like a very uniform tear. I'm going to scale that in along the y-axis a little bit. And really that's not a bad idea to use the displacement modifier. So I'm going to show you kind of how we did that. So just go to modifiers, displace, and textures, which we don't have one for that, so just go to the textures, add new, and name this paper displace. And when we make the size of this very, very small, it's just going to add finer detail to it, help it look a little bit better. So you can play around with the settings however you like, but I think that looks good. And I might go ahead and do that to this piece of paper as well, because I think that added just a little bit of detail like we're going for. Where was that? Displace. There we go. Paper displace. And there we go. You can see that, just a little bit detail makes it look like it's kind of been in the rain for a while, crumpled up, dried, been in the rain again. And it just helps with the overall look for it. And these other posters are kind of flat, so I'm going to go ahead and subdivide that to make it more square, so that when we go ahead and subdivide, we're going to have more even geometry. And that looks like a bit too much. Okay, so even though we didn't subdivide it that much, when we go into our displacement modifier, paper displace, looks like it didn't do much of anything. I'm going to go ahead and make that paper displace 001 so that we can change the size of it. Okay, it's already set. So you can see if we increase the size, then it's starting to affect it. And I think that's enough. Certainly it's way too much strength, so I can take this down. And we just want a little subtle effect. We don't want anything crazy. And of course make that smooth. And like the other one, I'm going to take these corners and kind of curve them in and bring them out again. And doing that, just those little things really help the scene. So it's not really so much the main part of the scene that helps sell the image. I mean, certainly that's the basis of it, and that's the essence of your scene. But just the little tweaks here and there are really the essential things that help make your scene better. So let's do the same thing here. And of course I forgot to subdivide it. That's kind of roughly square already. So even though I didn't add that many, it's going to be kind of on the side, and I don't think we need too much. So just a little bit of wrinkling here and there. Bring out those edges. And there we go. Lastly, because I don't want this video to drag on too long, but the very last thing I'm going to do is add leaves to these things, because remember they were square and I deleted them because I don't really like square leaves. So I'm going to go into my other layer here. May as well just go in my other layer. Pick a third one. Shift S, cursor to center. And I'm going to quick make a leaf. So I would suggest adding in a reference image and modeling after that. That's generally what I did before, but I'm just going to, for the sake of time, kind of guess what it's going to look like. I'm kind of nervous this is probably going to turn out terrible, but we'll see how it goes. A quick little modeling session. I think ivy is like a three-pointed leaf. What am I going to do? Let's see. Okay. That looks kind of awful, but from far away, it looks better than a square, so I'm sure you could make yours look a whole ton better. I'm just going to merge those at center, turn off my proportional editing. Okay, well, that doesn't look all that good, but oh well. Okay, so this isn't really a time to show off my modeling skills. I'm just making a quick leaf, and that looks vaguely enough like a leaf that I will go on from there. So, don't judge me on that, I hope. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing we did with the other stuff, but now we're going to do it on this vine here. And you can see that right now it's a curve, and we can't add particles to a curve. But what we can do is we can save, press Alt-C, and mesh from curve. And now we have a nice mesh instead of that curve, so we can go ahead and now add a particle system. Leaves. Make this a hair. Under render, I forgot to name that. Leaf. Choose object and leaf. Okay, so that doesn't look very good. No, it doesn't look very good at all. But we can take this leaf and remember our rotating thing, because it matters what rotation it is. So we'll just try to find, looks like it's on this axis. Maybe it's even on the z-axis. Because I kind of want these to lie flat against the wall, or as close to it as possible. Rotate on the x maybe. Rotate on the y. Well, none of those seem to work. But we can go in here, under advanced, we can check rotation. And kind of choose which one of these we want. I think maybe I want a global X. There we go. We can add a little bit of random, so we get a little bit of variety, but it's mostly pointed that way. And now we can take our leaf. Let's see, I'm going to guess rotating on the Z, 90 degrees, make sure it lines up with our origin there. And there we go, now we have our leaves. And obviously they are way too big, so I can turn down the velocity, way too small. Okay, so maybe a little bit of random velocity. And we can play with the rotation a little bit more. Like that. Okay, so I'm sure if you had better leaves variety, you can make it look a little bit better than that. But even that looks better than squares, so I'm going to go ahead and add that. Do the same thing to this one here real quick. So mesh from geometry, add a system, and we can now choose the leaves one already, since it's already set up. Press the 2 here to make it an independent thing, such as we can now change these particle settings without affecting the other one. And mostly want to check rotation, because I think we're going to want the velocity hair. I don't want any random. That just kind of looks like a mess. That's what that looks like. Because what's happening is it's kind of wrapping around the barrel. So this is kind of a tricky situation because we can't have them all rotated at the same thing, because otherwise it's going to be wrong at least one point. So I'm going to go ahead and choose normal for that. And it looks like right about there it looks the best. And we want less. And I'm going to make these a little bit smaller. So 0.2. Okay, that looks fine for now. So I think that's all we're going to do for details. The rest of it's going to be through bump mapping and normal mapping. If you think of something else, go ahead and add it. But right now I'm going to go ahead and render this out so you can see the difference between before and after. So I'll see you in just 1 second. Alright, I'm back with our final render. I did make a few adjustments in GIMP, but in this tutorial series we'll be going over compositing at the very end of the stage, but I just did it here so when I put it up as a title it doesn't look, it'll just look a little bit better on the website. But anyway, you can see here that the details really helped. It's not perfect. If I were you, I would go in and make a few more changes, just a couple, maybe make these leaves a little bit smaller. And the grass looks a bit sharp. If you could, if you wanted to curve it out a little bit to make it more soft, I think that would make it look better. But overall, I think that helped it quite a bit. And the difference between this and this is pretty good. Like I said, it's not perfect, but just taking, maybe an hour, maybe 2, depending on how much effort you're putting into your scene. If you want it to make it realistic, just adding a few of these details, giving it a nice variety, and considering what would I expect to find in this environment, and adding it in there really helps make the scene believable to your viewers. So the main points that I hope you take away is to always keep scale in mind, which looks like I should have done more there, but always keep your scale in mind. Figure out what details you want to have be bump mapping and normal mapping and textures, and what would be better as actual geometry. And keep in mind just different things that you can put in your scene that would help make it believable. So I suggest looking up reference images. So if you're making a scene of, a grungy street, look up grungy street on Google and just kind of look through and see what might be there. Maybe there's like some water bottles, or we could add quite a lot to this. But just keep in mind, don't just base it off your imagination. While using your imagination is awesome, but looking up references is um, good in combination with that, because you tend to forget a lot of the finer details. So again, the difference between this and this, one looks much more realistic. You can see the lighting changes a little bit, but um, that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I hope you learned something, and I hope your next renders will be a lot more detailed. So the next part of this tutorial, I'm going to be going over materials, and after that I think is time for rendering and compositing. So that's all the time we have for today. Sorry it was a little bit long, but I hope you got something out of it, and if you did, then give us a like, or feel free to subscribe, and have a great day. See you next time.